Everyone, welcome in from the Texas heat. The time is 9 o'clock, and we will call this meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board to order. Today is Friday, August 18th, 2023. Mr. McAnally will lead us in the pledges.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
I laugh every time we do
I know. We all stumble. I love it though.
Thank you, Mr. McAnally. We will now have roll call. We do have one board member that's absent today, having given prior notice. Mr. Bolton had a hearing come up today that took him away from Austin, so we will have roll call and then we can excuse his absence.
Chair Sarah Oates.
Present.
Martin Lynch.
Present.
Chance Bolton. Yolanda Castro.
Present.
John Eichelberger.
Present.
Paola Escalante Castillo.
Present.
Martin McAnally.
Present.
Stephanie Robinson.
Present.
And Lacey.
Present.
I will hear a motion to excuse Mr. Bolton's absence.
Madam Chair, I move that we excuse Chance Bolton for his absence.
A second. We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes. I would like to note at this time that if any visitors wish to speak, they must complete a public meetings comment slip. It's outside the front door here or over here at the desk. And that is for any items that are not on the agenda. Or on the agenda, there's a time for public comments for things that are not on the agenda, and then during agenda items, we will call you to speak. I would like to note that we're going to move item 28 to go after item 13 prior to the executive session. That is Pearson View is coming to give us a little talk, so I wanted to go ahead and let them do that before we get too far into the meeting. We have a big agenda today, and we are going to try and move through it expeditiously, but we want to make sure that obviously we leave room for any comments. So if I am ever going too fast, then please slow me down. We are here to discuss items, so just let me know if I'm going too fast. I have asked Mr. Castro to open the meeting with our mission moment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me this opportunity to speak today. I started at TALCB in the summer of 2020, approximately 3 years ago, when I was first tasked to be a part of this group. I was definitely unsure about anything I was going to be doing here. It was, oh, well, that's nice. I think I hear myself. But I knew I was only dipping my toe in the board here because I was just kind of going for the remaining term of a member that was leaving. So I kind of didn't think I would need that much of a commitment. I just kind of give it a little bit of a view and see what it's all about. So I came to a couple meetings beforehand, and even after those meetings, I still did not know how much work, how much of get any insight about what I was going to do. I kind of had the procedures done, but I kind of didn't know what was going to go on. So I just didn't realize there was so much that happens behind the scenes, and that is completed by the support staff here at TLCB. But since that time, I've seen us as a group persevere through a pandemic, create efficiencies throughout the agency, with education, licensing, budgeting, enforcement, and customer service especially, as well as put people in positions to succeed within the agency. And it is for these reasons that I renewed my commitment earlier this year. I've seen the effects of these policies when they were implemented, and I just love seeing the changes that were made and the impacts that they've made on license holders and the users of appraisal services. And when we have, and I think this group has the mindset of putting them first and putting them at the forefront with all the decisions that we make. And that is definitely something that I support fully, and why I renewed my commitment. I see a lot of challenges on the horizon, a lot of things that we'll be taking on, including Perea and its impact on our industry, the emergence of artificial intelligence and how that's going to be coming into play in the appraisal industry, and also the ever-changing rules, regulations that the federal government has that impact our state. But I have full confidence that we have the correct people in the positions and in the right places in order to confront these incoming obstacles, and come what may, what is foreseen and what is unforeseen. I've been proud of the work that I've done so far, and I'm proud of the group that I'm a part of. I still know that there are many challenges to overcome, but I'm grateful to be able to do it with the people here today and those that work diligently through the week to make our policies and the ones that we make here a reality. So once again, Madam Chair, thank you for giving me this time.
Absolutely, thank you. And we are very glad that you did recommit. I think it's important for this board to have some fresh blood at times, but also continuity. So we appreciate that you have committed to another 6 years. Thank you, Mr. Castro.
Was it 6?
The next agenda item is an opportunity for anyone to comment on items that are not on today's agenda. I do not believe we've received any requests for public comment. So we will move on to agenda item number 5, which is the ratification of the official record of the May 19th, 2023 board meeting as approved for posting on the website by the secretary of the board, that can be found starting on page 8 of our materials. Now would be a time to note any changes to that record, and if not, then I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board ratifies the minutes of the May 19, 2023 board meeting.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Robinson, a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 6 is the final orders and surrenders in the matters of A, B, and C. These start on page 11 of your materials. We did not receive any requests for public comments on any of these enforcement matters. So there's no motion necessary by the board, but it is an opportunity for us to discuss if you have any questions on these orders. Hearing none, we will move to committee reports. Agenda item number 7 is the report by the Education and Licensing Committee. Mr. Castro, the education report is on page 24 in our materials. Is there anything that you would like to highlight for us?
No, nothing at this time. I think we're going to be talking about a couple of things during the meeting, but we'll get to that. So I'll just take it as it stands.
Thank you, sir. The report by the Enforcement Committee is on page 27. Of course, Mr. Bolton is absent today, so if Mr. Castro or Mr. Eichelberger have anything that they would like to highlight from the enforcement meeting.
As far as I know, Chance didn't give me any notes on that, but I know we were going through kind of some state-by-state comparisons on enforcement and what other states did, and it was finding that we as the state is not an outlier on enforcement. We're pretty much middle of the road
Yeah.
on how things are done. So nothing came out of it that was a surprise.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's important that we do a checkup every once in a while to make sure that we are not an outlier one way or the other. So I appreciate staff for bringing that information. That's part of the ASC report, isn't it? Yeah. Agenda item number 9 is the report by the TREC and TALC Joint Audit Committee. Mr. Bolton serves on that committee, but Mr. McAnally was kind enough to attend it in his absence on the day of that meeting. These are in our materials on page 29. Mr. McAnally, is there anything that you would like to highlight for us?
Yes, I would. It's a very rare occasion, but I was really proud of our staff. Through the audits that were conducted, the audit firm had no findings.
Oh, fantastic.
And actually, there was one, and I was visiting with someone prior to the meeting about this. In my experience to audits, that's a rare occasion. Even if there's no findings, there's a recommendation. But I guess I was exposed to a new category, and it's the areas that could be classified as opportunities for improvement. And the one opportunity for improvement is overall TREC commissioners and TALCB members are given complete information, but they also recommended that the board members be identified with their skills and expertise to be used in a positive manner to help the agency through working groups when warranted or appropriate to address concerns to the profession or consumer protection in developing plan to begin addressing these concerns. And my experience on this board is we've been doing that for quite some time.
I was going to say, did they identify that as something we weren't
I think
doing?
we're already there.
Okay.
So I'm really pleased and proud with the staff and what they did, and congratulations.
Very good. To that point, I would like to know if that was feedback for more the commission or on our side, because I feel like, you know, I very much think about who should be on which committee and what their strengths and weaknesses are for those committee appointments. So if there is an area that we could improve on that, I certainly am open to it.
I think that's a great question. I think you're doing that really well. I think that was that was a piece of feedback from the commission side, and it was very narrow in scope. So I think the chair has received that and is able to accommodate that need, but I don't think it was a reflection of the board.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Yeah, TREC has quite a few committees, don't they? Yeah. That's what I thought. Okay, thank you, Mr. McAnally, we appreciate that. Agenda item number 10 is a report by the AMC Advisory Committee. Ms. Reed Lynch, this is on page 31 in our materials, and this was more of a robust AMC committee meeting than we've seen in a while, with several public members attending. Is there anything you would like to highlight for us?
First, I would just like to say we have a new member, Rahila San Law Firm. So she's been accepted as our new committee member, and she's taking the place of John Eichelberger, who I had the pleasure of working on our AMC committee with, and he's now on our board. So I want to thank her, but also I want to thank Lisa Rodriguez, Julia Hayes, and Frank Towney that have been serving with us, and it is a commitment, and it's service, and I appreciate it, and it's for the good of all of us, and they all bring something to our meetings. We had several items, like she said, and most of them will all be discussed in agenda item 19, but the new rule, Senate Bill 1222, is one we'll talk about. It's a pure investigative committee, just like on the appraiser side. Now AMC is considering having a committee for that. And again, we'll talk about it. And the second item that I just wanted to briefly bring up is the periodic reviews. We've discussed this in the last few meetings, and it's here, and agenda item 19, we're going to take some action on that. And the other things will also be discussed. But that's a brief highlight, and we'll see more about it later.
Thank you, Ms. Reed Lynch. Yeah, agenda item number 19, as I'm sure Ms. Santos will tell us later, that is the result of their bill failed to pass at the end of this legislative session. So we then decided to take it up as a rule and try and make as much of an impact on that as we can. So that's what agenda item number 19 is. Agenda item number 11, the Budget Committee report, is on page 34 of our materials. Ms. Robinson, is there anything that you would like to highlight?
Yes, just wanted to thank the staff for their hard work on the finances and helping us get through the budget draft and revisions so that it can be ready to go for the board. We have, as a committee, we've come up with our draft that we'd like for the board to review today, which we'll do later on in this session for the fiscal year 2024 budget, and we'll be discussing that and possibly having a vote on that as well.
Very good. Thank you. I know that July meeting before we approve the budget for the year is a hefty meeting, and I appreciate the Budget Committee digging into the numbers and making sure that we are trying to make the best projections that we can. Agenda item number 12 is the report by the Executive Committee, and that's on page 36 of our materials. It is very self-explanatory, so there's nothing that I want to highlight from it. We like to have the Executive Committee at the end of all the other committee meetings so that we can, talk about anything that needs to be talked about before we come to the board meeting. So that's sort of how that went this time, and some of the items we will be revisiting later. Agenda item number 13 is the staff reports on agency operations, initiatives, and statistical data. Do we still call you Commissioner Buckholz?
I think I'm Commissioner Buckholz until January.
Oh, until January, okay.
Yes, so my name tag is correct today.
Okay.
But we did have a discussion about that this morning. And you can just call me Chelsea.
We might call you Commissioner for a couple more years, but we'll get it eventually.
Well, good morning. It's good to see each of you on this extremely hot August day. To me, this is a season of great anticipation. Personally, it's for like college football, the start of school, which was this week, and then also just relief from the heat. But here at TALCB, we are also in a season of great anticipation with the conclusion of the fiscal year at the end of this month, the beginning of the next, September 1st. The completion of the RAMP project next fall, the availability of ASC grant funding, and so much more. I'll mention just a few items for you, but first I want to direct you to the staff reports and really the executive summary that begins on page 39. Most of the information here is self-explanatory and within the norms of what you see. But I do just want to highlight two things from that executive summary. The first is the budget. The budget report includes data for 10 months, and it shows a collection of 84.1% of total revenue, which is just higher than 10 months should be. I think if my math is correct, we would be at 83% of our collected revenue. So this puts us with just a tiny lead over where we expected to be, which really means we're just right on track. Additionally, we have spent 72.6 of our expenditures over the same time period, which puts us ahead from a budget standpoint. So this means we're in a very good position to end the year. And I just want to note that and acknowledge Renata Williams and the entire finance team for their work at nailing our projections and for their strong work on this budget. At the end of the month, of course, I mentioned we'll conclude one fiscal year and begin another. And so with the fiscal year at the end of August, I'm just really also proud of this same finance team for how they're working ahead to conclude strong and to make plans for a fresh start next year. You're going to hear a lot about this work, but I want you to hear me say that from a budget perspective, we are right on track. We are exactly where we need to be. We have room to make necessary adjustments, but I do not believe today is the day for any need for adjustments. We're just where we need to be, thankfully. Thank you, Renata. I also want to bring to your attention the second bullet on page 40 under the Enforcement Division. Government-sponsored enterprises are the largest source of complaints at 47%. This is exclusively Fannie Mae. This is followed by consumer complaints at 43%. So this is the first fiscal year where consumer complaints did not make up a majority of the complaints received. I think that's noteworthy. We continue to watch this closely, and we suspect that the reason is simply a reflection of the current real estate market and the delay in the government-sponsored enterprises conducting reviews, which is typically a year after closing date. Beyond the staff reports, I want to just make note of a few things for you. And first is the Appraiser Diversity Initiative. They have an appraiser workshop in Houston next week. And this is for aspiring appraisers to learn just more about the field and how to become licensed. And Melissa Tran has the opportunity to present to this group to share our Texas licensing requirements and to make sure people know just how efficient and easy it is to become an appraiser in Texas. She'll walk through the pathways for licensure, and she will be able to highlight the different pathways to licensure that can accommodate individual needs. This is a great opportunity for TALCB, and I'm excited to see the fruits of this presentation next week. I also wanted to mention really publicly, it's something we've talked about at the committee level this season, but the AQB, as you know, has adopted a new edition of the qualifications criteria. This will become effective January 1st of 2026, so we have time. So this new criteria has a mandatory appraisal bias education. This is in line with the direction the industry is headed, and we see this as a great sign. Staff is working on communications to let the industry know of this change with all license holders, and we'll be changing our processes and accommodating this, this new piece. And we'll keep you updated as those changes occur. Few operational updates. The first is a ramp project. This is the this is our database replacement project that's happening over an 18-month period. It should be complete next fall. Once implemented, we will see more efficiencies, more self-service on our website, less manual processing. The short version of our process today is that we're on time. And we have a very dedicated group of staff, both at TREC, TALCB, and the combination of those who work on both sides, that are working extremely hard to make sure that we get the best, most innovative product we can get. This is particularly challenging because we all have our daily work to do. And this is not daily work. This is over and above. And they're doing a beautiful job of juggling both the daily work and the important need to get this right, which means a lot of digging in. We are having tailoring sessions where each division meets with the vendor who's implementing this database. And this looks like about a week or more of meetings all morning, all afternoon, every day, for about 5 or 6 days, where we walk through all of our needs as it relates to the design of the database. So this is very important work, and our team is knocking it out of the park. So stay tuned as that process develops. And lastly, this is a warning for all of you. In the next few weeks, you will receive an email from our IT team, and it will be an assignment to complete IT security training. I'm so sorry. It is required by law for all appointees and all staff. Our staff are completing it right now, and we would just ask that when you get that email, that you take some time to complete that security training between receiving the email and when we come back in November. That will allow us to survive an IT security audit. That's the mission. Really, the mission is to say secure, also audits. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have on any of those topics or something I missed or anything.
I am so proud of our staff about rising to the challenge and being so conscientious. It just fills me with a lot of pride and appreciation.
Amen.
Good job.
I share that.
I wanted to sort of piggyback on your comments about Ms. Williams and that whole department, and to just sort of highlight, in case the rest of the board wasn't really acutely aware of that process, but we start on the budget in April, and what staff does is they give us up to that date of what's happening. So like in April, I think, when we approved the budget last year, so for example, when we approved the budget last year, we thought that we were going to have another 900 trainees for this year because that's how many we had last year. Then we get to April and we say, okay, obviously that's not going to happen. The market changed drastically. And so I think in April, the revised number was maybe about 450. And then things changed a little bit again, and so then we get up to date to June numbers, and I think we landed right around 400. But it's real time updating the information as the year goes on, because of course we're approving a budget, but all we have is several months ago, and the market is changing so much. So to have that kind of information that allows us to try and make the best projections that we can is great, because of course the market's gone up and down, and things have been all over the place in the last few years. It went we thought it was going to go slow, then it went really fast, and then it went really, really fast, and so it seems like it's maybe correcting a little bit. But I certainly appreciate having all of that information and being able to see that we're not looking at stale numbers in order to try and make the best projections that we can. So that will be, so we're seeing today the final budget that we will vote on and discuss for adoption. So thank you to Ms. Williams.
And I just want to add to that, in terms of the budget, I know we'll go through the details later. You're absolutely right in terms of how the market has changed in the last year, 2 years. And so that is hard to project, and that is hard to stay on top of as we look at numbers. But I do want to thank the staff and the team and the agency. Y'all know from a committee level, I am quite conservative when it comes to numbers and trying to make sure those numbers don't put us in any bad situations. And we did a great job. I mean, 72.6% expenditures at this point, when we should have spent more than that at this point. I think it's fantastic. And I applaud you guys for really watching the numbers and watching the revenue that comes in, watching the expenses, to be able to put us in this position at the end of the fiscal year. So so thank you guys for that. Thank the finance team for that. Thank you for your leadership in that. So I did want to point that out. Great work. Also, in terms of the enforcement committee, you mentioned there was an event that Melissa Tran will be speaking at in Houston. Can you give us the date and the name of that event if you have that handy? Just so that whoever's watching, if they want to attend or participate in that.
I did not put the exact, I know it's next week, I didn't put the exact date in my materials.
That's okay.
It is on our website as,
Great.
I believe, the most recent announcement.
Okay, perfect. So we have it on our website, so if anyone wants more information.
Absolutely.
Great, and thank you, Melissa, for doing that. Texas is, I pride our state in being the leaders in the field, and I think this is a great way to show our leadership in that area of diversity. So thanks for doing that. Also, the database, I know this is a huge project in terms of operations, and I thank the team for putting in the work for doing that. I just want to say that publicly, like, the staff is going through all of this, and we as a team are going through all this so that we can make it better for our appraisers and our consumers in the end. And so thank you all for taking the initiative to do that, because it's very important that we make our industry, we make the state of Texas, for appraisers and consumers, we make this a good state for them to be able to work in, and to be able to feel like they've been treated fairly, and that their things are being processed efficiently. So that is a huge job to revamp all that, but I just want to point out that it is for the benefit of who we serve. So thank you guys very much for doing that.
Absolutely.
You reminded me of something, Ms. Robinson, that we can't say anything about expenses without acknowledging that Ms. Tran's department is still processing things in a timely manner. We're not suffering there. Mr. Hood's department, customer service is running the way that we want it to. So that's also the win, that not only are we staying within our budget, but we are meeting expectations as well.
Amen. Great.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Commissioner. Good morning, Mr. Slagle.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. I am going to be very quick. I am just up here to give you a sort of a wrap-up of the ledge session, since the session ended after your last board meeting. Just to let you know, during the regular session, we tracked 358 bills. That's for both TREC and the board, and 45 of those actually made the cut. Most of those are administrative in nature. A lot of them apply to occupational licensing agencies in general. Some of them deal with contracting. Some of them are HR related. Since the end of the regular session, there have been 2 special sessions, and just to talk briefly about those are called for specific reasons. Typically, there aren't any bills related to what we do. We do track those sessions just to make sure, but they're called for specific reasons. There's likely going to be another one in the future, but it has not been called yet. But I did want to talk about 2 specific bills just briefly. The first one is SB 1222, which was our implementation bill. And just to, for the record, just to specify what that does, it affirms that a license is not required to obtain experience through PIREA. It removes the requirements that applicants submit an affidavit for their experience, clarifies that experience submitted by an applicant must be compliant with USPAP, repeals the requirement that the agency develop study guides for appraiser licensing exams, and has already been mentioned by Board Member Reed Lynch, the bill authorizes the board to utilize an investigative committee similar to PIC. So there's several rules on your agenda later on to for your consideration. That's part of the implementation process. We followed obviously proposed rules for your consideration for that. The other bill I just want to briefly mention is SB 1577, which was mainly dealing with real estate and TREC related issues. But what that bill does, has also been mentioned, is it changes the name of the executive director of the board to the commissioner. That bill's effective January 1st. So there are rules on your agenda today, but they also follow that effective date. They're proposed for your consideration, but that change will not be effective until January of next year. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
I thought that all bills went into effect in September. Is that not?
No, they're able to put that in. A lot of times it's to give the agency, if they talk to the agency, time to implement things. Mm-hmm. And there are some things on the TREC side that needed a little bit more time, so that particular change, since it was part of that big bill, was added to that January 1st.
Very good. And the other thing was we're going to see today some rule changes as far as veterans, and that has something to do with a bill that wasn't a TREC or TALC bill. Is that correct?
Right. There's yes, ma'am. There is a bill, and this has happened sort of incrementally over sessions, that tries to help veterans and spouses of active military, as well as active military people, get licensed when they're transferred for their active duty. Because appraisers have reciprocity already, it really doesn't impact how those people can get licensed, but we do need to make rule changes to implement that particular legislative change.
Okay. Yeah, and I just wanted to mention that because Mr. Bolton called me earlier this week and said, what is all this stuff we're doing with veterans? Where did this come from? And I said, it's a statute, it's a bill that wasn't about us, but we have to make sure that we're in compliance with it. So that's a lot of that, what we'll see today later. Thank you, Mr. Slagle.
All right, thank you.
Is that it for staff? Very good. Unless anybody has any questions for Director Tran on enforcement items. Very good. We have now moved agenda item number 28. This is the presentation by Pearson VUE regarding the administration of licensing examinations for appraisers. Mrs. Wheeler. Now this is, so the board understands, Pearson VUE is not here because we have called them because there's been an issue. They are here because
There's a contractual obligation for them to present once a year to the board and to the commission.
So that just started, so we will hear from them regularly going forward. But I just want to make sure y'all understand we aren't listening for some sort of excuse for a problem that came up that we've identified.
That's a good clarification. Thank you. Okay, good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Jennifer Wheeler, Director of Education and Examinations for the record. This morning I have the opportunity to introduce Carrie Dahl, one of our Pearson VUE Management Team liaisons. She is here to provide a brief presentation for you to give you a better understanding of who PV is and what they do for us. Since she was here, she came in yesterday, and several staff members, including the executive director, had the opportunity to visit one of the Pearson VUE testing centers and found it to be a really valuable experience. We were able to see firsthand what the applicant testing experience is like. We were able to experience all of the security measures firsthand and observe the smoothness of the operations that take place on site. It was really a valuable experience. And in the future, because Pearson VUE will be coming annually, there may be opportunities for board members to participate in that, should you be interested in. Now, I know you all may be tempted to ask Carrie questions about exam pass rates, given the focus that we have placed in this area. And the reports that we receive from Pearson VUE are very instrumental in our continued monitoring. However, as a reminder, this is our internal initiative and outside of Carrie's purview and the purview of Pearson VUE. So that's just a little disclaimer.
She doesn't write the questions?
That was my primary question here. I guess I can go.
So I'll give you a little bit of information. Carrie is on the business development team at Pearson VUE. She focuses on the regulatory market in the Western United States. She has been working with potential and existing clients in areas relating to contracts and partnership management. Carrie's been with Pearson VUE for over 2 years, having previously worked on the other side of licensing and certification fence for an instructional design firm that partnered with professional associations to create certification preparation and recertification courses. As the certification prep representative of those associations, she worked with colleges and universities, local and national association chapters, and global training partnerships for organizations such as APICS for supply chain management professionals, and IFMA for facilities management professionals, and APA for payroll professionals. Carrie is based in St. Paul, Minnesota. Please join me in welcoming her today.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I am thrilled to be here today to talk to you a little bit about what we do in relation to the appraiser board. So I have a presentation that I've put together with a few talking points. So as we move through that, please let me know if you have any questions. Okay? If we could, who is in, there we go. So a little bit about the AQB. So Pearson VUE works with the AQB, and the AQB creates the content. So they provide the content outlines, they provide the test questions, etc. So we administer the national uniform exams that come directly from AQB. And they are developed so that when you asked about, does Carrie develop the questions? I do not. Those are actually developed by another vendor, which is not Pearson VUE, but we do administer those exams on your behalf. So, a little bit about the content outlines. Those are accessible to both yourself and any of the individuals that are looking to sit for the exams, and they are also included in the handbook, which I'll show you an example of in just a moment. Sample questions, which are provided by the subcontractor that does write those questions, are also included in that handbook for anybody to view and to become familiar with. We do absolutely recommend that candidates review the handbook as well as all of the sample questions, the content outlines, etc., before moving forward sitting for an exam. So this is the candidate handbook. And this is accessible. I have a hot link in there, which obviously you're not linking to, but if you go to pearsonvue.com, you can at any time look up any of our exams that we administer, including this, and then through that, you will land on a site that's specific for appraisers for Texas. So on that site, we have both the content outlines for you to download and this handbook. And I strongly recommend, if you haven't had a chance, take a look at this because it is comprehensive. It covers test center policy. It covers those sample questions that we talked about, content outlines, and then some details on the testing experience itself, what to bring to the test center, the exam procedures, registration procedures, the pricing for taking the exam, etc. So as Jennifer mentioned, in my previous life, I worked almost directly with individuals that were looking to sit for certification or licensing exams, and I would often refer them and walk them through handbooks just like this. It's a very valuable resource, and again, if you have an opportunity, I would encourage you to check that out. We also have in there the reschedule, cancellation, absence policy, as well as our accommodations policies. So this is one of my favorite slides because it is so beautiful. This state of Texas has an incredible amount of test sites that are available to the students to sit for exams. We're looking at about 200, with 6 of those being military sites. So we have pretty good coverage. And actually, after last fall's meeting, we were able to add another site in Alpine. Is it Alpine? Yes, which, now that I'm like, maybe my glasses are old. Yes, so we were able to add that site because there was what we identified as a gap there. And with the assistance of the Real Estate Commission and some recommendations on who to speak with, we have now filled that space as well. So what we're looking at here are 2 to 3 different types of test centers. And Jennifer mentioned that yesterday we were able to do some tours of a Pearson Professional Center. So what you see with the P, the blue spots, are our Pearson owned and operated testing centers. Those are built and maintained by Pearson for Pearson exams. So it's only Pearson exams that are proctored there. The footprint is exactly the same as far as the color on the walls, the art. So when we were touring yesterday, the individuals that were able to be in that test center could confidently walk into a test center in Omaha, Nebraska, and feel the same type of environment, the same colors on the walls, the consistency for comfort and training, or in testing. The third-party centers, of which we have 171, those are partner sites that we work with that meet our strict security standards, training for proctors, etc. Often those are in colleges and university settings because of the type of business that colleges and universities do, computer labs, etc. So that really allowed us to expand the footprint for examinees statewide. In addition to this map, you also have access to sites across the U.S., I want to say about 1,300 different testing sites. So if you are sitting for the Texas Appraiser exam, you could in theory sit for that in Salem, Oregon as well. If somebody is testing remotely, or especially during COVID when people did a bit of relocating, that was a big benefit. Would you switch? And this was a question that came up yesterday. So I went and pulled this from last fall's presentation. These are the sites, the top 5 sites throughout the state where we see the highest volume for these exams. And we have a 3-year history. So I apologize, I do need glasses. 2020, 2021, and 2022. This fall, once we have our full numbers for 2022 to 23, we will be updating that. So this it does a good breakdown, and these are all third-party sites, which is kind of shows the value of that expanded footprint. Are there any questions on test sites or anything that I've covered so far?
I just had a quick question. How often do you evaluate which areas need test sites? Like, for example, I'm thinking rural areas, areas of certain populations. Like, how do y'all evaluate that? And great job on having the military sites. I love that.
The military sites are really popular. They don't see, obviously, the higher numbers because they are restricted to military personnel and their families. However, it is a huge benefit, and we're really proud to have those. And the state of Texas, I want to say, has 6, if I remember correctly, which is a great number. We have a team that is what they focus on, is taking a look at some of those areas. And we will often do, we'll kind of take a look at and run the numbers on zip codes where those individuals are coming from. So for instance, if their zip code that they give us isn't anywhere near a test site, we start to look at that area and see what type of opportunities are available for a partnership or a third-party site. We also have a capacity management team, which takes a look at seasonal. Some of our exams that we offer will be offered for maybe 1 month a year. And so the capacity management team will take into account, and I'm going to pick on Microsoft, which I did yesterday. And this is by no means saying that they are one of them, but that's a very large name with a large testing body, and they may test for the month of April. And so let's say in the month of April, our capacity management team will take a look at all of those sites and all of those areas and make sure that there is enough opportunity for our consistent availability of sites. So for the site that we added last fall, we also worked really closely with the commission and the real estate boards nationwide, insurance, et cetera, and talk about if they're seeing or hearing anything from their individual examinees on, we would really like to see a site here, or could we have something closer? And then they bring that to us, and we have a team that manages that and does seek out new opportunities. Yep.
Are the testing centers open after hours, or, that's me. Are they open after hours? That's just coming from, are weekends, or are there opportunities outside of normal hours for?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the capacity management team works with that as well. Okay. So for instance, in some of those higher testing volume, I would say weeks, months, timeframes, we could be open anywhere from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sometimes when the capacity isn't needed quite as much, or it's a lower testing volume timeframe, it will shorten those up. An example that we talked about yesterday, even at the testing center locally, was during COVID, they were open till 11 o'clock at night. So it really depends on the volume that's coming in, the numbers that we're looking at. So things like that are flexible.
And what is your goal as far as, if I can recall, and I didn't even remember this from when I took my exam, but I recall a couple of years ago, someone said my trainee couldn't get an appointment for a test, I want to say in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, something like that. So do y'all have an internal sort of goal, like if someone gets online, that they hopefully can find an appointment within a certain time frame before you know, okay, we're not meeting the needs of this area?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because it does vary with different organizations. I would confidently say because I've never run up against that, within about 2 weeks.
Okay.
But the other thing to take a look at is with the individuals in particular, if they're looking for one specific spot or one specific testing center, that may cause more frustration as far as availability if they were to open it up to a few testing centers in the area, specifically in a space like Texas. Mm-hmm. We have so many sites that's rare, right? So, and especially now that we've developed that third-party network, that may have been more common prior to COVID and prior to us expanding, but now it's very rare that we run into that.
Okay. And obviously with your third-party testing centers, you have less control over the hours and that sort of thing, because I noticed that the Alpine one was a third-party center. And so, my thought is, I think those people are used to having to drive and, and do things on off hours. But I think that's important for us, that our license holders across the state, especially in rural areas where we have fewer appraisers, and we would, are trying to encourage more people in the industry in those areas, that those testing centers have, sufficient availability to, because it's such a long process to become an appraiser,
Exactly.
it's years long, and then you go through the audit process, and then so when you're talking about 2 weeks, 2 weeks is fine, I think, but, when you start to get to 4 weeks or something, it's, that just is adding to the frustration of, a barrier to entry.
Oh, absolutely. And when people sit for an exam like this, they want to do it when it's fresh, and they want to do it when it's convenient for them, and they want to make sure all of those things happen in succession. One thing about the third-party centers that you mentioned about as far as scheduling, with the majority of them being at colleges and universities that specialize in testing, we also do work around things like spring breaks or seasonal closures. Those will generally be maybe a week at the holidays or a week during the spring, etc. But when that happens, all of our sites need to get us their schedules 3 months ahead of time. So as an individual who's scheduling their exam, when they go online and choose their site, they will see options months out. And so we're never surprised by, let's say, a third-party site saying, oh, I forgot to mention that we're closed that week. That's not something that happens. So the schedules are always about 3 months out, which does allow for things like planning and things like getting ready for that exam in the space that you're looking to do that.
Okay, I won't keep this going, but I just want to make a note. Can we add the location thing to our Education and Licensing Committee for next round to look at geographic locations of folks that we have as applicants versus locations? I just want to make sure we're covered on that. Thank you.
And then,
I had one quick question real quick. I'm sorry. I know that appraisers have a calculator that usually is not used as the 12C calculator. I had a colleague that had a problem with a proctor saying they couldn't use that calculator or something like that. What is the process of going and kind of making sure that they're able to use the items that they need in order to complete that exam if the person that's proctoring it is unaware of what the process is or what they can use on that particular test? So
yeah, so that's a great question, because calculators in particular have become small computers, right? So we do have calculators at the sites that we allow individuals to use, but they are more of your basic calculators. Once you start to take a look at your graphing calculators or right, anything that has the ability to do alphanumeric or alpha, any letters, anything where you can write yourself notes, those are restricted. We can't have those in the test sites, and they do go through that within things like the handbook and the prep course, or not the prep courses, but the preparation materials. But nobody would be without a calculator on site, because all of the test centers have, and it varies per organization that we're working with, but you have agreed that all of the individuals testing have access to a calculator, which can be on site. So they do have those to provide to an individual. If somebody does bring in a calculator that is programmable and has those modern, I guess to say, modern features where you can program things in and write notes to yourself, those are not allowed, and they will not be able to, they won't be turned away, but they will have to lock them up with their belongings. Yep. Yep.
Sorry, last question. How do you handle accommodations for individuals that need special accommodations for testing?
Yeah, so we follow all ADA regulations, and like in the testing center yesterday, and I would love for you guys, if you had a chance, to come and do a test tour or a site center tour. They're really interesting. So we have a separate room available for accommodations for individuals that need a separate room. We have accommodations that allow for individuals extra time, perhaps a reader, etc. So all of those are ADA compliant, and they can go through, and I believe that they are approved by Pearson VUE. If anything is escalated, we work directly with your teams to make sure that those accommodations are approved in accordance to how you would like to move forward.
So the accommodation request comes through us and then to you guys, or it goes directly through you?
It goes directly through us.
Okay.
Because we have an accommodations team that works with every
Okay.
agreement and board, et cetera, to figure out exactly how you want to work with those. And then anything that gets escalated, we bring up to the level of
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. How far in advance do they need to notify you before testing, and then what documentation do they need to show?
It varies. So they do need to, they need to let us know about any accommodations requests prior to registering, because we need to make sure that the location and the time is available for the accommodation that they're looking for. So we work closely with them to approve that. The documentation varies based on the type of accommodation that they're looking for. So anything from IEPs for individuals on individual education plans to doctor's notes. The people that do apply for accommodations are generally very familiar with the documentation that they need. And we always help them work through that process if they're unfamiliar or this is something they haven't done in quite some time. You bet.
Thank you for asking.
So exam scheduling and delivery, a little bit more about what we just talked about. We have the business rules that are established by each agency that we follow, and we work closely with them or with each agency as we set the process up. The two options for scheduling, the web is open 24/7, and then we also have the contact center open. So the contact center is able to help anyone who is looking to schedule online, isn't sure of the process, but I do also want to let you know that that center, the call center, and the individual have access to the exact same page for scheduling. So there isn't anything that one has access to that another doesn't. They're both on the same platform, the same website even. Confirmation, reschedule, cancellation notices are sent via email to the address on file. 2 forms of ID are required at all test centers. An individual does need to register with their full name as on their driver's license or passport. So for instance, if you go by your middle name, but your driver's license has your first name listed, that is what needs to be on the registration. So your primary ID must be government issued with a photo and signature. A secondary ID could be something like a credit card that has your signature on it. Candidates leave the test center with score reports in hand, so they know immediately upon leaving whether they have passed or have not passed. And they also have their score report available to them online at any time. And all exam fees are $55, and that is listed out in the handbook as well. And then if I could just have you move forward once more. This is an example of the score reports. This is what an individual will walk out of the test center with in hand. So there isn't any stress about, did I do okay, did I not? They don't carry that out with them. So they either have on the left, they'll have a passing score report, which then lets them know what the next steps are and how they will be contacted to move forward with their license. On the other side is the failing score report, or those that have not passed the exam. It gives you the pass rate and then what they have received and as an individual, and then it does go further down for them and breaks it down by area. So they can also, when preparing to take their exam again, focus on the areas that need a little bit more work for them personally. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that brings us to the questions, which it does. So are there any additional questions that I can answer today?
The candidate handbook, is that delivered to when they sign up to take the test, they're alerted that that's available somewhere?
Yeah, so it's available on the website all the time. So anybody, even if they're not looking for this specific exam, can look at that handbook and download it at any time. I believe that everyone is aware of that prior to, when they go online to schedule, it's right there.
Okay.
So if anybody is even looking to schedule an exam, they're going to see the handbook.
That's
Okay.
perfect.
Great.
Perfect.
Okay.
Very good. Do we have any other questions for Pearson View? Thank you for traveling here. Where are you coming from?
Minnesota.
Oh, well, welcome
It's really
to the
warm
heat.
here.
I'd like to say it's an anomaly, but it's not. But come here in January and you'll know why we live here.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
But as far as the summer goes, we're just getting started.
I was driving over what I thought was a creek, except I don't think there's any water in there.
No.
Okay. Just checking.
That's not a surprise.
Sometimes.
That's what the Rio Grande looks like. It's totally dry. It's just
Sand.
just dirt. Yes.
Well, very good. We will collect questions throughout the year if we have any for you for your presentation next year, so we
Wonderful.
certainly
And I
appreciate
would like
it.
to make myself available if anything does pop up. Please feel free to reach out.
Very
And thank
good.
you so much for your
Thank you
time.
so much. Yes, thank you so
Thanks.
much. Very good. Okay, so this takes us to agenda item number 14, executive session. We do have a need for an executive session today. It should be brief, so we'll keep it short so that everybody can get back quickly. The time is now 9:59, and the board will go into executive session to obtain the advice of legal counsel or discuss pending or contemplated litigation, including settlement offers and enforcement actions pursuant to Texas Government Code 551071 and personnel matters pursuant to Texas Government Code 551074. We anticipate returning to open session and Way to go, everyone. It is now 10:15, and the board is back from executive session and reconvening in open session. Agenda item number 15, these are rules for emergency adoption. Discussion and possible action to adopt emergency new and amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 153. Ms. Santos, this is on page 71 in our materials.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members, Kathleen Santos, your general counsel. Before you, agenda item number 15, discussion and possible action to adopt emergency new amendments to Chapter 153, specifically 153.6, military service member veterans and military spouse applications, 153.9, applications, 153.15, experience required for licensing, 153.20, guidelines for disciplinary action, denial of license, probationary license, and 153.21, appraiser trainees and supervisory appraisers. I believe this is the first emergency adoption we've had in some time, at least since I've been here, so I wanted to give you all a brief overview of what all that means before we get into the substance of the rules. So emergency rulemaking is something that agencies can do under specific circumstances. For example, if there's some imminent danger or some health and safety concern, the things that we would think of as an emergency that might call for an emergency adoption. But that also could mean a change in federal or state law, which is the situation we have before us, where the effective date is happening sooner than that normal proposal, adoption, comment period, and then they need to take effect sooner than the board can act between our quarterly meetings. So the trade-off in emergency rules being in effect immediately is that they can only be in effect for a temporary period and renewed only once. So best practice typically is you adopt an emergency rule that goes into effect temporarily, and at the same time, you do that rule in that normal notice and comment process. So they're happening at the same time, these parallel rulemaking adoptions, so that there's complete coverage of in the effective date. And so you'll see these same rules later on in the agenda proposed in the normal manner. Does anyone have any questions on that before I move on to the substance of the rules themselves? Okay. So the proposed adoptions before you can be divided in two main categories. Those that relate to the removal of the affidavit requirement for submitting experience that Deputy Commissioner Slagle mentioned earlier with the passage of the, I believe it was SB 122, that's the board initiatives bill that removed that requirement that experience be submitted on an affidavit. That bill goes into effect on September 1st, and that's why they're being adopted on an emergency basis. The next category of rules is the military service member veterans and military spouses. We talked about this a little bit earlier. This was a bill, sort of a general application bill to all state licensing agencies that relate to, for occupational licensing agencies, specific to military service members, veterans, and the spouses. As mentioned earlier, the board has reciprocity for licensure, so a lot of the same motivation behind this type of bill doesn't necessarily apply to us. It applies to state agencies that don't have a reciprocity process, where there's different requirements in different states. And so the rules changes that you see are kind of combined. One is reorganizing the rule in general for clarity. The other is moving all those military subsections that are in the application rule into its own rule, again, for clarity, and just really the ease of implementing the pieces of SB 422 that do apply to us. So you'll see, look, there's a lot of blue and there's a lot of red, but it really is just relocating, rearranging, and making the necessary changes that we need to do to implement that statute. And so just to specifically point out the changes, we're removing subsections within the application rule that didn't really apply to us. There was some language about residency requirements that doesn't apply to us. We don't have one, so we're removing some of that language. The specific modifications that SB 422 made was more a requirement on the agency. The language used to read that, verification of an individual's in good standing with another jurisdiction or issuing a license. That deadline previously was as soon as practicable, and now that language is now no later than 30 days. And so that doesn't really change anything for our applicants. It really only changes everything for us, and we are well within those deadlines, so that doesn't really have an effect on us. Finally, we are also adding a statement of clarity because this section applies generally to several licensing agencies, and then we also have our federal requirements and our specific requirements within our own statute. We just have a general statement that's saying that nothing in this is meant to amend or change those other existing requirements. Staff's recommendation is to adopt the new rule and amendments on an emergency basis with an effective date as September 1st. And I'm available for any questions you may have.
Any questions?
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for emergency adoption amendments to 22 TAC 153.6, 153.9, 153.15, 153.20, and 153.21 as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption with an effective date of September 1st, 2023, and staff is directed to prepare any new forms or make changes to existing forms as needed to implement the new rule and amendments.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. McNally and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any questions, further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 16, Ms. Santos.
Item 16, discussion and possible action to propose new amendments to 22, Chapter 153, and those specific sections are listed specifically in greater detail in the materials.
Page 85.
Thank you. This all should look, some of it should look very familiar because we just talked about it in the emergency. Now we are on implementing that traditional route of rulemaking. Here.
So some of these are the ones where we change commissioner to executive director, and so when would this go into play? Would that, not that it matters, right? But just for.
Well, technically, that statute goes into effect on January 1st, 2024.
And these would be?
It could be on September 1st, but also with that traditional rulemaking, when our meeting's happening, the time it takes to post it, everything, maybe it might be a few days shy or early, but I think.
What will we do?
Well, we can, honestly. It's very, I'm glad you mentioned that, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's what's happening in several of the sections in point 1, point 5, point 9, 24, and 28. We discussed the proposed amendments to 153.9, 153.6 earlier regarding the military service members, veterans, and spouses, and the reorganization of the rule. And then again, in 153.15, 20 and 21, those all implement removing that affidavit requirement. And I may not have mentioned earlier, when it was appropriate, we replaced the language with a certification requirement, and that really is still, they've got to be truthful in what they're saying. They just don't need a notary to watch them sign.
Yeah.
And then finally, we have some proposed amendments to 153.241 in our sanctions guidelines. That's just to allow greater flexibility for anyone with fourth-time discipline. And you will see the same change within our sanctions guidelines in the AMC rule later, and for the same reason, but just to let you know that that same change is in both. Staff's recommendation is to propose the amendments as presented, and I'm available for any questions you have.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we accept as the list is presented to us for publication and public comments to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for the proposal.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item number 17, discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 157, Subchapter A. Ms. Santos, page 111 in your materials.
Thank you. This is regarding specifically Section 157.6, request for advisory opinions. The proposed amendments before you in this section would add language to reflect a regular process of review for advisory opinions for the board. The executive committee reviewed the language and also recommends these changes, as well as staff. And then just for a little bit more context, this is part of sort of an ongoing review of the process of issuing advisory opinions. We've issued them in the past, and later on in the agenda, we'll be looking at substantively the opinions that we've previously issued. And so staff's recommendation is to propose the amendments as presented.
Yeah, so this is, it just says that, I don't even know that this iteration of the board was aware that there were advisory opinions issued in the past, and so we just didn't have knowledge of that. So this just makes it where we review them on some sort of regular basis to refresh the memory of all the board members and also decide if they're still relevant. And like Ms. Santos said, later we will look at the ones that are currently, that we currently have for that very reason. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 157.6 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical and non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Castro and a second by Mr. McAnally. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 18 is the discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 157, Subchapter F. Ms. Santos, this is on page 114 in our materials.
This is specific to Section 157.50 negotiated rulemaking, and the only change here is consistent with the other changes with changing the title of Commissioner to Executive Director. Staff's recommendation is to propose the amendments as presented.
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 157.5 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for a proposal.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Robinson and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 19, discussion and possible action to propose new and amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 159 on page 117 in our materials. Ms. Santos.
Yes. So, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, the specific specific rules are listed in greater detail in your board materials. We have a lot of the same changes that we've made previously mentioned. Again, more changes from the title of Commissioner to Executive Director. The proposed amendments in 159, 201 and 204 clarify the applicability of USPAP as it relates to AMCs. This is essentially cleanup. There really isn't any change in substance for those changes. We've got cleanup and references to certain information provided to the ASC, and then clean up the language that relates to clarifying our statute of limitations and the applicability. And I mentioned this earlier with the sanctions rule related to appraisers. There's the cleanup of that language, adding greater flexibility in sanctions for that fourth time level discipline that we propose making changes in the AMC related rules. You also have new rule 159-202 AMC Investigative Committee. That was something that Deputy Commissioner Slagle also mentioned with implementing SB 122. It authorizes the process for committee review for complaints involving AMCs. It's modeled almost exactly after our Appraiser committee. The proposed rule identifies who serves on the committee, the timing of the review process, the manner in which the committee members and staff may communicate. And then I think one big distinction in this committee as to the Appraiser committee is it would be potentially a mix of board members and AMC advisory committee members. And this makeup of the rule was reviewed by the AMC advisory committee and approved. Between the time we published the materials and today's meeting, I did receive feedback from our policy advisor at the governor's office, and he had a few more suggested changes based on our conversation that I wanted to just sort of walk you through that we would recommend changing based on that discussion. If I could point you to page 126. That's where the new rule begins. I would just clarify language that we have at least one board member. The feedback was that limiting it so that you wouldn't have a quorum. My recommendation would just say one board member, but no more than two, having language in there, just limiting it to two board members, because just like with the AMC rule, if you serve on this, you're recused from any sort of adjudication if it moves on to the next level. So to preserve numbers but also still maintain that feedback that this process provides, I would recommend limiting at least one board member, but no more than two, to serve on the committee. And that would be consistent with the way the Appraiser pick committee works. The other kind of cleanup suggestions were sort of related to that is that in subsection E, I would strike the word board, and same as an F, strike board members, and then board later on in that sentence, again in H. And that's because we have an advisory committee member on this committee, and it wouldn't just be board members whose opinions we'd be considering. So it would just change the language to the committee as a whole, and not limit it to board members issuing their feedback. So, the proposed amendments to 159.155, this was discussed early on in the agenda. This would remove that specific percentage requirement for the periodic review of appraisals that AMCs are to perform on appraisers on their panel. The amendments would remove that specific percentage requirement and require AMCs to have a written policy in place for conducting the reviews and make the policy and supporting documentation available upon request by the board. And that's consistent with board powers. This isn't adding anything more that we couldn't do otherwise. And staff's recommendation is to propose the new rule and amendments as presented. And I'm available for any questions you may have.
And we did receive a public comment from Reva on 159, 155.
And the letter actually was in support of all those proposed changes to 159, but specifically to that one.
So I did want to point out that we had a little bit of a discussion about this at the AMC committee on the bottom of page 126. When it talks about the makeup of the investigative committee, we say at least one board member. So this is different than on the appraiser side, because on the appraiser side, it has to be an appraiser board member. But this is just says at least one board member. And we wanted that flexibility because, we have lawyers, on our board, we have, small business owners, so we wanted to make sure that we could pull in your areas of expertise if necessary for those investigative committees. Anybody have any other questions for Ms. Santos? Periodic reviews are finally seeing some change. If not, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit new and amendments to 22 TAC 159.1, 159.52, 159.104, 159.105, 159.155, 159.201, 159.202, and 159.204 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical and non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Castro and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Takes us to pending business, agenda item number 20, discussion and possible action regarding the TALCB fiscal year 2024 budget and financial administration policy and investment policy. Ms. Williams, these materials were sent under separate cover, and if you're using your iPad for materials, those are on your desktop.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Renata Williams for the record. This is agenda item 20, discussion and possible action regarding the 2024 TLCB budget, the financial administration policy, and the investment policy. And as Chair Oates stated, you should have received the materials under separate cover, and the cover kind of looks like this. Okay. The second draft of the fiscal year 2024 budget was thoroughly reviewed by the Budget Committee, as mentioned by our Chair, Ms. Robinson, and is offered for full board consideration for adoption. Several key highlights since the May 19th meeting, they're reflected on, it will be page 4 of the actual document. It includes that our revenue projections are through June of 2023. So this allowed us to refine our projections based off of 10 months of actuals and 2 months of estimated figures. In addition, staff continues to identify ways to comply with the directive from Sunset Commission, which is to decrease our available fund balance. And just a little side note, as of 9:25 this morning, we had $3.5 million in the bank, which is a combination of our treasury bills, repo agreements, and cash in bank. In regards to our projected expenditures, the second draft incorporates a 3.5% across-the-board increase for all employees, as well as a 3% performance-based merit allowance. The salary increases also affect the employee benefits, thus the other personnel costs increase slightly. The professional fees and services, you're going to see decrease due to the original grant-funded contract term expiring August 31st of 2023, so that was not included in the budget going forward. We will not be able to apply for a grant until that notice of award opens, and we're anticipating that being sometime in October, but more to follow on that. You're also going to notice that our travel budget increased by $10,000, and this is to support in-person attendance at mandatory meetings for all TALCB staff, as well as ensuring we continue to offer professional development opportunities with conference attendance. Our board travel is also included in that line item. The Budget Committee recommended that the second draft be adopted. However, we do, want to present this to the full board for consideration. They also reviewed the budget and financial administration policy and the investment policy, and there were no changes to those, but we're required to review them annually. Do we have any questions?
I just want to remind the board, as you're looking through that, and I just X'd out accidentally, but as you're looking through that, in terms of the employee salary increase and performance-based merits, we were doing that this fiscal year to be competitive. We want to be competitive in the marketplace so that we can keep our high-quality staff in place and all of that. So that would be the reason why we're continuing to carry over that initiative.
I just wanted to say that I, like Stephanie, am very fiscally conservative, and I really appreciate the conservative budget that you've presented. I think it's realistic considering economic changes that are occurring and an outlook for the future. And so I thank you for a very hard job. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
And I want to, again, thank the Budget Committee for their hard work. They start on this in April and dig into the numbers and ask a lot of questions and question a lot of the figures. And so it's a process, and it's staff spends a lot of time on it, and the Budget Committee spends a lot of time on it. So it's a huge effort, and we appreciate that that we have something that we can feel confident in at this meeting before we have it approved. Look again to mention these numbers on page 8. the projections. I just wanted to make the board aware, because we have these figures in front of us, that in fiscal year '22, we had 906 trainee applications. And, and the numbers obviously are going down from there, but I think it just goes to our overarching goal of trying to, those people are now probably coming up for licensure. And so, we want to try and do everything that we can to make sure that we hang on to those people and that they do become part of the profession. That was sort of a once in a generation increase there. And so we certainly want to do our part to try and make that impact on the industry. So, does anybody have any questions about the budget for Ms. Williams?
Complex.
Thank you, ma'am.
Out of curiosity, do the figures for the Trek figures, do they at all mirror our figures as far as when things are going up? They're all going, I mean, I know they do to some degree, but is it closely related or not?
I think it is actually kind of in a way closely related. We do see some decreases in certain areas, and we're seeing some spikes in some other areas. We're also noticing that, we had a lot of people that came into the market during COVID. And we're also seeing, not everyone is renewing. Right. So, that is to be expected. So we're seeing some similarities in some of those things.
Yeah, and of course, real estate license holders are obviously more transient than appraiser license holders, so. Any questions before we consider a motion to approve this budget? Do we need to go through the policies before, and we'll do it all at once?
I believe they can just do it all at once.
Okay.
Because there were no changes to those documents from the previous, they were reviewed and everything.
Okay. So no questions about the policies either. Okay, so we can consider a motion at this time.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approves the fiscal year 2024 budget and finance administration policy, and investment policy as presented.
I happily second.
We have a motion by Ms. Robinson and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Thank you so much to you and your staff, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, ma'am.
And you will hang around for agenda item number 21, the report on Public Funds Investment Act training compliance. This is on page 136 of our materials.
And yes, ma'am, this is agenda item 21, and we do have a statutory requirement to present a report to our governing body at least once every biennium on the training compliance of the governing bodies and the investment officers of the agency. And so with your materials, you will have our investment training compliance statements. It basically affirms that all members of the governing board on both TREC and the board and the agency investment officers have attended at least one training session related to that person's responsibilities under the PFIA, the Public Funds Investment Act training. The Public Funds Investment Act statute, and have attended the training session not less than once each fiscal year. And then we maintain on file every board member, every commissioner, their appointment date, when they completed their training, same as for our investment officers, so that when we are audited, we will have this information available.
Very good. No action is required from the board on that item. Agenda item number 22. I'm sorry, did anyone have any questions for Ms. Williams on that report? Agenda item number 22, report on fiscal year internal audits. These are on page 138.
Agenda item 22, did you want? Let's see. So Liz Myers, who is our representative from McConnell & Jones, she gave a report to the TREC Commission on August the 7th on the status of two of our audits that we completed and the prior year follow-up audit. Mr. McAnally gave a brief discussion about what we discussed in our joint audit committee about these audits. But basically, for the governance audit, the internal controls were generally effective, and best practice processes were noted in the area of the commissioner and board compliance with respective regulations. With the HR audit, we did have a new HR director. She came on board August 2022, and during her short tenure with TREC, she's implemented and updated policies and procedures to make HR more efficient and effective. They did identify one internal control weakness and 2 opportunities for improvement. And then the follow-up audit report was basically a status update on the implementation of the findings from the previous audit, which was the accounting and financial reporting reconciliation audit. The procedures have been updated, which our target was August of 2023. Those are already done, and so that's why that was 100%. The other was the CAPS reconciliation report. We have a target date of August of 2024 for that one, and that's because we're contracting with a CAPS configuration consultant to review the configuration of the system, because that's ultimately what the issue is that, we're trying to stuff a square peg in a round hole. CAPS was not configured for an SDSI agency. It was configured for all of the other agencies, and so we're trying to fit our practices in it, and so it doesn't always work for us. So we have to hire a consultant to come in and basically identify all the ways that it's not working for us, submit that to CAPS, and get them to try to reconfigure it for us.
Oh, wow. What an undertaking. Jeez.
So was that what was in the recommendations?
Yes, ma'am.
That's,
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That was one of the recommendations, is to hire a CAPS consultant.
okay.
Yes, ma'am.
What I think would be useful for us as a board is, as I'm looking at this and the objective of this year's audit, is some sort of regular list showing what the topics of the past audits were, so that, so for example, if we want to say, when is the last time, our rules were audited or our budget was audited, that information would be available to us. And I like the detail, like on page 140, where it actually says, here are the 4 things that we focused on. So I want to make sure that that's included in that information. And I don't know how often that needs to be included in materials, but something about that when we talk about audits would be extraordinarily helpful.
So you're referring to an internal document with our team preparing, not our team, the board, but our staff preparing year-over-year progress or findings?
No, I'm more thinking like, okay, we're talking about board governance in this audit. What did we talk about in 2020, and what did they audit in 2018 before, most of us were here?
Yes, ma'am. Not a problem. And I've provided that actually to the chair of the audit committee, so that document's already prepared, so I can share that with you all.
Fantastic. That would, I think that would be helpful. And I assume when you were on the audit committee, that's something that y'all considered. What's up for cycle this time?
Yes, well, and the other thing though too is that the contract auditor will bring out things that need to be audited, and then the audit committee can prioritize it. For example, if I'm right on this, I think I remember correctly, but we decided as a committee that the HR needed to move up in one aspect for it. We decided that the IT department needed to be moved up and so we are able to prioritize the methodical audit of the different phases and the different areas of the agency. And so that's how that works. As Ms. Williams said a moment ago, our agency is converting to CAPS 2, and there are a lot of challenges. So this is not unique to the licensing board here or TREC. It's something that's kind of uniform across all the spectrums of the agency. So
That's good to know.
yes.
Thank you.
Any other question about the internal audits this year?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. How often would you like to see that report? Is that on a board meeting basis, or? Oh, I guess we're audited annually, so.
Annually.
Yeah. So just review it.
Right, I'm trying to think of at what meeting do we kind of talk about,
would be a great
because this is the results of the audit. So is there another meeting where we sort of introduce what's going to be audited this year, and maybe at that time?
Well, this year is a little different because in last year, they approved a 2-year audit plan, so
Okay.
it covered 23 and 24. What I could do is I could present you all with what is on the FY24 audit plan as a refresher, and then also provide you that historical information about what's been audited in the past. The audit chair asked me to provide him information from 2016 forward. Is that sufficient, or would you like?
Yep,
Okay.
that's great.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm glad that exists already. Very good.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This takes us to agenda item number 23. Discussion and possible action regarding amendments to the TREC and TALC Memorandum of Understanding. This is on page 164 in our materials. Ms. Santos. And we will take up item number 25 after this so that Ms. Santos can stay up there.
Hello again, everybody. Before you is our memorandum of understanding with TREC, and this is something that has regularly been entered into between the two agencies to fully describe the roles and responsibilities of each agency as the legal structure and status of each agency has changed over the years, from the board becoming an independent subdivision of TREC and the unified agency obtaining SDSI status. You can see the track changes versions in your materials. Most of them are technical changes. This document was presented to our executive committee, and it was approved at TREC at their recent meeting. The big change here is that this is an agreement that would be reviewed and renewed every 2 years. The change is to not have a deadline and have it just continue to exist, but the mechanism for each respective agency to amend it exists at any time. So there wouldn't be, I think what was meant to be addressed by this change was there wouldn't be a gap that happened if we didn't have a meeting before the term of the agreement expired. And so staff's recommendations is to approve the agreement as presented.
So my question at the committee was, having an open-ended, agreement or policy of any kind sort of makes me think it could go the way of the advisory opinions, where we aren't even aware that this document's out there because we haven't revisited it. And so I asked Ms. Santos to provide me with some historical MOUs and to see what the changes were, to see if there was anything that maybe I hadn't thought of that or that any of us hadn't thought of that might require us to make sure that we look at it more regularly. And this isn't, the open-endedness of it isn't intended to, pile it away and not look at it for years. It's really providing us more flexibility. And I didn't see anything when I looked at the historical MOUs that made me think this is something that we need to be, more regularly updating or looking at. I mean, it's pretty standard. And if there is a need for a change, it talks about how we share employees between TREC and TALCB and that sort of thing. So if that need arises, then, it'll come back in front of us. So I'm comfortable with this change. Any questions for Ms. Santos?
Not really a question, just to piggyback off that. I think that's what makes it acceptable as well, is that either side can make a change whenever needed, so it doesn't pigeonhole us. And so I agree with that.
An additional, it is included in your training materials that we go through every year. So there is a mechanism that it will be reviewed by each agency.
And in that November meeting, I think it's good, because we discussed that and what it actually means and sees the percentages. That's real important to see the percentages and why they apply. We're a much smaller entity. So, I like knowing that.
If not, this will require a motion by the board.
Madam Chair, I move that the board adopt the amendments to the TREC TALC Memorandum of Understanding as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. McAnally. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes. We will go ahead and visit agenda item number 25, discussion and possible action regarding recommendation from the Enforcement Committee to withdraw TALCB advisory opinions. This is on page 181 in your materials. Ms. Santos.
So we've mentioned advisory opinions earlier in the context of amendments to our rules. This is looking at the substantive advisory opinions that this board has previously issued. This was brought before the Enforcement Committee with staff's recommendations to go ahead and withdraw these, primarily because they're old, they're stale, the law isn't applicable, they're inaccurate, and what is accurate isn't really helpful in the form that it's in. And so staff's recommendation is to go ahead and withdraw these opinions.
Yeah, you can see the first one was written in 2006. Does anyone have any questions or objections to withdrawing these two advisory opinions?
None.
That will require a motion by the board.
Madam Chair, I move that the board withdraws the TALCB advisory opinions regarding requirements of TALCB license certification and license requirements for reviewing appraisers.
I second.
We have a motion by Ms. Robinson and a second by Ms. Escalante Castillo. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Santos. We will now move back to agenda item number 24, discussion regarding requirements for license reinstatement. Good morning, Director Tran. This is on page 170 in our materials.
Morning, Madam Chair, board members. This issue is regarding reinstatement of appraiser credentials that have expired. So staff brought this item to the Education and Licensing Committee because Texas's current rule is over and above what the federal requirements are. Federal law only requires that a reinstatement applicant complete continuing education for the time period that they relapsed. Texas's current rule, in addition to the continuing education, requires that an applicant gain experience, pass another experience audit, and then if they've been expired for more than 5 years, retake and repass the exam. The chart on page 172 of your materials provide a sample of reinstatement requirements in other states. The most unrestrictive example is Iowa, which only requires continuing education to be complete and does not limit the reinstatement period. So someone can come in and reinstate at any time in Iowa, only completing the continuing education. The most restrictive example is there are 2 states that only allow reinstatements within 2 years of expiration, and after 2 years, that individual would need to come back and reapply as an initial applicant. So going through all of the initial licensure requirements. At the committee meeting, the committee agreed that the exam requirement should be removed, but the committee is seeking the board's feedback on a couple of items. The first being whether the reinstatement period should be limited. So something along the lines of an appraiser can only reinstate within X number of years of expiration. And the second being whether there should be additional requirements for those applying after a certain number of years. So for example, something along the lines of an appraiser reinstating more than X number of years after expiration should be required to do XYZ requirements.
So as Ms. Tran said, the Education Committee kind of talked through all of this, but Mr. Castro said, you know, I really want to go to the full board and talk to all the appraisers and sort of get your thoughts on trying to think through, somebody has let their license expire. How long do they sit out? After they've sat out for how long do we need to, you know, check on their, you know, qualifications again, and what does that mean, and is it continuing ed and experience and an exam? Should you take an exam again? So we just wanted to make sure that we had sort of thought about that. You know, obviously we are thinking about it theoretically, but you know, each of us, if you were out of the industry for 10 years and you were wanting to get back in, Ms. Reed-Lynch, what would be reasonable, you know, to require of a license holder? You know, I'd have to say no exam.
I think you said that.
Once you pass the exam, that's good for life, right?
Director Tran, can you remind us what are our current requirements if they want to get back in?
They want to get back in, it depends, under the current rule, it depends on how long they've been out. So if it's been less than 5 years, they do continuing education, get experience, and then get that experience audited. If it's more than 5 years, it's continuing education, experience audit, and then reexamination.
So for me, when I was looking at it in the Education Committee, it just seemed like another barrier to entry. I mean, we talked, and it doesn't happen all that often, but it's still an appraiser trying to get back into it, and another barrier to entry, especially on somebody that has been in the industry before. Us making it more difficult for them to come back in and start completing assignments, and especially for the having to take the test again, that seemed to me a little bit much. But I mean, but this is why I wanted to bring it up to the board, just to get a kind of sense on what you guys think on that issue.
When we talk about experience, how many hours of experience do they have to have?
It's 10% of what an initial applicant would do, so 100, 150, or 300.
Okay. I sort of think if you have been out of the profession for 5 years, having to go get experience essentially under a supervisor, correct? Is that how that would work? How would you do those without a license?
They could, so anyway, they have legal authority. So under supervisors, one way, if they worked at like a bank and they did USPAP compliant reviews, that's another way. So it just depends on, or, a broker doing BPOs could get experience if it complies with USPAP. So just however they have legal authority to do it.
No. My thought is, if you've been out of the industry for 5 years, do you need to go get more experience? I could understand a longer period of time because things like Fannie Mae requirements change, and you would probably need to be under a supervisor to understand all the things that have happened while you've been out. But 5 years seems like a short amount of time to have re-experience.
Re-experience.
But and that's probably true. And this is why I think the committee wanted the board to talk about it, because me not being an appraiser and coming in as a public member, I'm thinking if you've been out of the game for 5 years, USPAP may have changed. Like in this case, we've got a new criteria that's going into effect regarding the bias and different things. If they are not gaining experience, or I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm struggling with that. I just want to make sure that if we let them back, if we're letting them back in, they are fully qualified to perform their duties. And y'all would know more than I would, of course, because I'm not in the industry. But that would be my only concern. I've heard from multiple that we don't want to do the exam, and I'm cool with that. But I just want to protect the consumers to make sure that after 5 years of being out, they can't just jump back in, but they've got to make sure that they're qualified to jump back in.
So they would have to take the most updated USPAP in order to complete their education requirement. So that's the minimum that they have to do, even within the 5 year period. So even within that, they have to
definitely
take the
continuing
update.
education is necessary.
Right, and if and let's just say it's in 5 years. Let's say they start now in 5 years. They'll have to take, once the bias class is implemented as part of the education requirement, they'll have to take that as well in order to satisfy that requirement to reinstate.
Well, let's talk about that. So would they, because it says 10% of what a new person would take. So how do we know
that's the experience, right? Is that where
experience?
That's the experience.
Okay,
that's
10%
for the reports, like for when you're doing appraisals themselves.
Okay.
Not the education. The education classes are going to be,
The education is the same.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So education's the same in the sense of we have to take 28 hours every 2 years. They would have to take 28 hours. They're not taking 28 times 5 or
No, they're taking 14, so it's 14 hours for every year that you've been out, including the most recent USPAP update.
And then the most recent USPAP update.
Including the most recent USPAP update. Okay.
About 14, so if you've been out 5 years, someone do the math. That's 14 times 5, that's a lot of continuing education, sheesh. Okay.
Speaking from my old profession, when I left being a paralegal, in 5 years, I could have easily gone back had I taken some continuing education. Now I've been out a lot longer than that, and it's gone. So I'm thinking that my opinion would be that under 5 years, continuing education would be the only thing you needed. And then how much is up for discussion, obviously. But after 5 years, I think you would also need the experience, because it starts to go away. Most of you are young enough, you're still retaining, but I'm not. And so what I'm saying is that as time goes by, things change, not just the law, but in your business, and the economics and the technology. And so I really think 5 years is the limit for coming back on experience, on education only.
So if you came back 10 years, it's 10 times 14?
10 times 14.
Sheesh. Wow.
That was another reason why to bring it to the board as well.
Does that seem reasonable?
That again.
What classes would you even take? Because qualifying ed, you could get, but you can't take qualifying ed because those are 28-hour classes, so that would be easy, but it would be hard to put together 140 hours of classes.
And you can't repeat the same classes.
Right. I don't even know how you would find that many of continuing ed.
Continuing education.
Yeah.
That's
You'd
actually,
have to take a course. You'd have to take courses.
Yeah.
that's one thing that we can't toggle. Yeah, that's the federal requirement.
Well, glad you know that.
There you go. Yeah, we would be in line with federal regulations if we continue with that.
Yeah, okay.
So, once again, it's few and far between. This is not an issue that's affecting a lot of our license holders, but it's one of those barriers to entry that I feel like we can tweak, and especially the exam.
And these are people with experience that we could get back into the industry, and I think that we want to facilitate that if we can.
And we don't really know if it's not affecting a lot of our folks. It may be a situation where people are not even coming back because of what's already on the books. So it may be a bigger number than what we think.
Right.
That it's
we see the
affecting.
requirements and we're like, no, I don't want to even delve into this.
Yeah. And then keep it,
What if?
I'm sorry.
These are just what ifs
Yeah.
Right.
at this point.
And as the board, keep in mind, 5 years, it's up to us if we change that, right? So 5 years is what we're looking at, what's on the books now, but it doesn't have to be 5 years. So
Right.
we're open to any of the suggestions
Great point.
and guidance of any changes.
Yeah,
what's reasonable.
I do, Ms. Sprinkle, like your idea of continuing ed, prior to 5 years and after that. USPAP, the baseline of USPAP is that you do what your peers do, and if you've been out of the game for a while, having some experience hours under a current appraiser to know what your peers are doing is probably necessary.
Yeah. I was thinking just as you were saying, the continuing ed for the less than 5 years, take out the experience, and then continuing ed and experience for after 5 years.
Yeah.
Take out the examination.
Take out the examination.
So just toggle it down just a little bit on each tier.
Yeah.
Is what my
But I do
thought.
like the 5-year mark. I think the 5-year mark makes sense.
Yeah, but again, I'm going to hop back on to page 170 about the number of experience hours. If they're out for more than 5 years, for a second, help me through that. In what capacity do they act as an appraiser? Are they going to have to be a trainee? Are they going to have to get their trainee's license? Is that the idea, that they come in as a trainee? Okay, because this is kind of silent to that, so I didn't know.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I thought of that.
So we probably would need to clarify that they are coming in as a trainee if that's the rule that we decide to.
Yeah, that's the only way to get experience hours.
Abbreviated by to only 10%.
So surely you could find somebody, let me come work in your office for 3 months and get these hours, or,
I don't know. I want to know that too. I mean, I have 5 trainees now, not all under me, mind you. But I have a trainee
do you,
meal.
Mr.
But at the same time, I mean, I still hear of people contacting me saying, I can't find a sponsor.
Yeah, because then it goes back into that pool.
Yeah. Been in the industry.
Right.
If you've been in the industry and you have no appraiser contacts, that's problematic.
Yeah,
That may be because you're the oldest one.
that might be.
You chased everyone out of town.
Yeah. So they would essentially, as we're saying, it be a trainee. And yeah.
So you think that the experience requirement is maybe too much?
No,
under
I'm not
5
saying
years?
that. I was just, how does this work? I mean, because it just says 100 experience hours, but I'm like, I'm just trying to put
Yeah.
myself in the boat. I'm trying to get my license back. So how do I do that? So you mean I have to be a trainee? Okay, so that means I have to take the 75 hours?
Yeah, see, that's the thing.
That-
Maybe we don't label it as
Well,
a trainee.
that would be part of continuing
There's no other
ed.
way to,
How do
you
I
can't
get,
sign.
how do I get a trainee's license if I'm taking continuing ed, like your requirement says? The current requirement.
Because it would be qualifying ed, right? If you're taking your trainee, it would be like a qualifying ed and,
I'm going with this.
well, qualifying ed and continuing ed would be one and the same,
you
wouldn't
take
it?
qualifying
You can
ed?
take qualifying ed as continuing education if you don't have.
We
if you
can't
haven't
take
taken it
qualifying
in-
ed, can we?
I know.
If you haven't taken it within a certain amount of period, you can't.
Okay, but
You can take
I
sales
can take
comparison
qualifying ed?
approach.
But I'm the hard-headed, the hard-headed former certified appraiser, and I say, wait a minute, now it says here continuing ed, that's all I have to have.
Right.
But now you're saying, no, you have to come in as a trainee all over again? And now I got to take, the general principles.
General
and
procedures,
15 hours
all
of
that.
use PAP and, all
But
the.
that would satisfy your
Now you're a trainee, now
continuing
you can get your
education.
30 hours, or 300 hours, excuse
Well,
me.
maybe, within 5 years or even after the 5 years and stuff, maybe you do need to take some basic classes again. I mean, that go right back to the bedrock, to the foundation, start all the way up just to get you back up to speed.
But I think I'm going with what Stephanie said a moment ago, and that is it needs to be clearer about that, because I'm already jumping all over the board just reading what I have
I
right
see
here. Yeah.
Is there a possibility to kind of clarify that the qualifying education for the trainee can be used as continuing education, or how would that be, how can we present that, I guess?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe the education goes back and talks about real world. I'm under 5 years, what exactly does that look like? And I'm over 5 years, what exactly does that look like? So that we have a better understanding of, and is this currently a rule?
This is a rule.
It's a rule,
So we'd have to
so we would so Education Committee would sort of dig into it, into the sort of nuts and bolts of it a little bit more, and then we would, from there, make a recommendation about a rule change at some point.
Yeah.
Is that how we would address this?
Yeah, it sounds like the board's concerns is anybody that's been out for more than 5 years, we want to see that they're competent in some way. So maybe we'll try to think of some creative ways that doesn't make them go through that trainee route again, if it might be a barrier, and then we can bring it back to the Education Licensing Committee.
Submission.
Yeah.
See, and Mark, that was something I didn't even think
Yeah.
of.
Yeah,
So I'm glad I brought it to the board just so we get this discussion, because that was definitely not
Yeah, let's talk
discussed.
about how do you put 140 hours together? What does that
That's-
look like?
well-
Do you do qualifying ed, and my understanding was that we couldn't take qualifying ed classes to count for continuing ed, but, so let's just dig into all of that.
I believe you can,
That's what she
as long as you haven't taken it within a certain amount of time.
Within the same renewal cycle.
You can take those classes again and again. I'm trying to remember the time. It's 2 years. 2 years. So you could take sales comparison approach 2 years, every 2 years if you want.
Fantastic.
Isn't that fun?
Fun.
Yeah, income
I don't have to
approach.
put together all
boom,
these
boom.
3-hour classes. I could just.
I know, what am I doing?
One big class.
And then you don't have to take the test at the end. Very nice.
And I believe we do
Very
have in
nice.
our rules, sorry to interrupt, we do have in our rules that QE could be used towards CE. I believe that is an AQB.
I think what you're thinking of, Sarah, is like the update course being replaced with the initial use PAP course. You can't do that.
Yeah, the use PEP.
The 15-hour
Yes.
to replace the 7.
That makes sense that I probably at some point looked into that and tried to take that class to get the 15
Yeah,
hours.
exactly.
Was unable to, so that's probably where that
So yeah,
idea comes
I do
from.
remember seeing qualifying ed being able to be used as continuing ed, so.
Okay, so as a board, we're thinking, or I mean, as a board, we're all just talking, but we're thinking we're going to stick with the 5-year the 5-year mark, and then we just need to flush out, flush out
The experience component.
the experience component, and if we are actually calling it a trainee, because man, if I saw that and I have to be a trainee all over again after I've already done all this stuff, I would think, man, I don't want to be a trainee all over again.
You wouldn't necessarily be a trainee.
Yeah, I mean,
You wouldn't have your license yet. I mean, you wouldn't
want to
have
be
your
called
license.
something else, like, I don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
And
But seriously,
you'd be
like,
an
I think
analyst.
about, and I don't know.
But we don't have a lot of flexibility with on the federal level, you are either certified general
Okay.
or a trainee.
Okay.
I mean, that's all the
have to fit within,
options that we have, so.
And if you haven't reached that criteria,
Then you are a trainee.
you are what
And, but if you're a trainee if you're a 55-year-old trainee for 7 months, but if you say, okay, it's a month and a half or something, maybe that's not, so if we get into that and talk about what that experience looks like, maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah.
It might not be for a long period of time, so, yeah,
That is true.
So we know we're going to do away with the examination and.
Yes,
And
Madam
we know
Chair.
we want to stick with the 5 years, and the continuing education, we don't have any flexibility on. So we will just dig into the experience part.
Right.
No, that sounds great. Thank you, board, for helping out, because this definitely gives us some more talking points in the education committee and things that we did not discuss originally, but I'm glad I brought it up, so. And yes, thanks, Ms. Tran. Appreciate it.
Very good. Okay. We will move to agenda item number 26, discussion and possible action to approve new and changes to TALCB forms. These are on page 185 in our materials. Mrs. Tran.
This should be a quick one. Staff presented AMC form changes for cleanup, updating, and streamlining the AMC process. These changes were presented to the executive committee, who agreed with the changes and recommended that they come before the full board for approval. If you have specific questions about any of these forms, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Anybody
I
have any
wouldn't
questions?
No questions, but thank you guys for continuously looking at how we can improve. I'd love it.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve new and changes to TALCB forms as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. McAnally and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Yes, when you look at this, our body of materials today, you realize how many staff hours have been devoted to these changes, so we certainly appreciate that. Agenda item number 27, discussion and possible action on the application of ASC grant funds. There are no materials on this. Ms. Tran.
No action is needed on this item, but of course you're free to take action if you'd like. I really just wanted to provide the board with an update on the ASU grant. The notice of funding availability is supposed to be published in the first federal fiscal year, which is October. There's been a few changes at the ASC in staffing. They hired a new ASC grants director in March, and a new general counsel was hired towards the end of July. So what we know is what we've known about the process is subject to change. And that includes, are they going to allow us to apply for more than the $120,000 per year? Are they going to change what approved activities might look like? So all of those things are kind of in flux right now. With this, staff intends to take the throw spaghetti at the wall approach, as Commissioner Buchholz calls it, and we intend to ask for funding to increase diversity in the profession through scholarships, funding to enhance technology, including interfacing with the AAC National Registry, and funding for training, continuing education, conference costs, things like that, that'll allow us to go to these events. The real big thing is just that staff is asking for the board to allow us flexibility to amend any of these requests if we need to, so that we can remain nimble with all of the things in flux right now. The application is probably going to open between board meetings, and we want to be able to apply as soon as possible.
Yeah. And just for sort of a broader context to this, the grant is, the scope of the grant and the recipients of the grant are identified by federal statute, correct? And the previous grants director and previous general counsel had their own interpretation of who and what these funds can be used for. And of course, that position has been unfilled for a while, which is why we don't have it in our 2024 budget, but it's now filled with a new director and a new general counsel, and it opens in October, but we don't know how these new people are going to interpret that. And so I think what Director Tran is saying, give us the flexibility so that we can ask for what we think can be under that purview, but if it turns out they're going to have a stricter interpretation of the law, then we want to do whatever we can to get the funds, so we might have to pivot at some point.
I think I'm okay with that. I don't want to put too many restrictions on you guys. I just want to know, like, particularly on the diversity issue, if I know that that's going to be scratched, I would want to know that before we apply. Not saying that I would stop us from applying, because we need the funding anyway for other initiatives. But that's the only thing. If it's like a major thing off that list that we're going to scratch, I would just want to know before we apply.
I think it would be more like we ask for most of what she mentioned, and we'll see what we get back. So
Yeah.
we'll ask for more than 120,000, get feedback, and go from there. But the diversity initiative is has such a national spotlight. I can't imagine that wouldn't be something that was instrumental in the way that ASC grant is facilitated.
Appreciate that.
And so we would apply in October, or we would get they give you the guidelines in October. Is that how that works?
The notice of funding availability is
Okay.
released in October.
And then we, along with the other 7 or 8 states that regularly apply for these, are probably all going to submit. And then it's a, months-long process to hear back?
Months long.
Okay.
Hopefully this new administration will be a little bit faster with it, though.
Okay, yeah.
Madam Chair,
Mm-hmm.
if this is occurring in October because that's the new year for the new financial year for the federal government, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we have this November workshop, maybe Melissa will be in position at that time to update us and see if things had to pivot or shift a little bit. So we would have real-time information at the November workshop.
Because the notice will probably give us some idea of what they're thinking the scope can be.
And I actually think they're doing an announcement ahead of time, too. And I think that'll shed some light on it, and I'll share that with you all when that is published.
Yeah, very good. Their poor general counsel, huh? Having to hit the ground running. Okay, any other questions about that? Thank you for reminding us that we could talk about it at the workshop. In fact, that takes us to
Add that to that.
In fact, that takes us to agenda item number 29, discussion and possible action regarding possible topics for November workshop. We have sort of a running list going that we've been keeping up with as committees, talk about things that they want to add to the list. One thing I thought of today was to maybe get a copy of that candidate handbook that Pearson View gives, so that we can sort of see what it is the trainees see when they go to schedule their exam. Of course, we'll add the ASC grants to that update if there is one at that time.
And the MOU is already on there.
Yep, that's right. That's right. Perhaps we could also have a short session on how to say substantive.
You can exchange that word with substantial. I looked it up and you would be legal to do that. Okay? And I think we should change that.
Yeah, that's what we said.
Throughout.
She would like to change it.
I use ChatGPT, and yes, I agree, we can change that. There's many options we can use instead.
I did that this morning. morning at 4:30.
Let's just learn to say it, guys.
4:30. I was going to just change it myself.
Making substantial changes, right.
I was.
Of course, okay. Anything else for the workshops? Workshop, sorry, not to alarm you, workshop. Discussion and possible action regarding agenda items for future meetings. I don't know how this works because Pearson View is here today, but I was thinking that might be a good, the February meeting where license holders can come and attend the meeting in order to get continuing ed hours might be a great place for them to do their yearly update, Pearson View. You know, so many license holders are supervisor appraisers and probably want to know about the exam process, you know, for their trainees. So I think that might be, if scheduling allows for that. Okay, maybe not this February because this February is our meeting where we have license, we can get hours. Is that correct? Okay. That will be a goal of ours. Anything else? Future meeting agenda items. Okay. Discussion and possible action to schedule future meeting dates. Calendars are on the last page of our materials. So we previously set a date of November 9th and 10th for our workshop and board meeting, and February 23rd for a board meeting. I want to confirm that those dates still work for everyone. So we can also set a tentative date for the May board meeting. May, of course, is busy. It's a busy time. With UT graduation on the 11th and Memorial Day on the 27th. The weekend of the 17th would be difficult for me. My firstborn child will be graduating that Monday, and so that's graduation weekend for us. I can make it work, but the 3rd, I think to avoid the 10th, if at all possible, the 3rd, May 3rd would be better for me. And those of us with children in school, I think that's probably,
May 3rd
yeah.
as well.
Okay. Anybody have any objections to May 3rd? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just looked at the calendar for Aero, and it is May 3rd through 5th. Aero Conference.
Yep, thank you. Oh, it doesn't have to be a Friday. I didn't think about that.
But it's Austin, we kind of want it on a Friday.
All right.
Just kidding.
Yeah, we don't want it the 13th after Mother's Day. Definitely can't do. Oh, geesh.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, the 17th is better than the... Aero is say the dates again?
3rd through 5th.
3rd through 5th.
Yeah, we don't want staff to have to, okay. Well, I guess...
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because wouldn't that be the day that a lot of people would be traveling? No, the 3rd. Wait, say the dates again for Aero. I'm going to write it down this time.
Aero's the
3rd, 4th, and 5th, okay.
Yeah. You're saying Thursday the 2nd?
Well, if we did it on the 2nd, that's a travel, a lot of people would be traveling to Aero. Do we know where it is? Nashville, yeah. Yeah, so that'd be a travel day. I mean,
What day is a graduation for you, the 17th?
the 20th, but that weekend would be,
How
you know.
about the 10th? What's wrong with the 10th? It's Friday before Mother's Day, but that's okay.
Well, it's also UT graduation. So for those of you who travel in for UT graduation, is that just
You're just there too.
maybe if we know, you know, ahead of time, we can get hotels booked for those of you that travel in, and how bad is it to have it on the weekend of
bad?
UT graduation?
She's
Not
never
any
done
worse than a
it.
football game.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Repeat what Dion just said. She said it's never been done before. But if we like booked hotels like today,
Right.
then we could probably do it. And I think we could
can
do
always
that. And I mean, if we tried to do that and it proved
Very
impossible,
good.
then you could do an alternative of like that 13th, Which is the day after Mother's Day. We could even accommodate like a later meeting so that you could travel on Monday instead of the day of Mother's Day. We can make anything happen.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll do the, I'll do the 17th. When we push it that far ahead, it sort of shortens the time for committee meetings, and it creates just, such a short window that I don't want,
I like the 13th.
theoretically, we would do the 24th, just kind of, that's the end of the month, Friday, the end of the month, but of course, that's Memorial Day weekend, so we're not doing that. So I hate to push us a whole month ahead of that, is really what so I'll do the 17th if need be. We will try for the 10th. And I think for flights, we would just, y'all usually fly Southwest, so we would just, like, when do they open up, like 6 months ahead of time? So we would just set a reminder on our calendar to that day, try and book those flights then.
I have a feeling that Dion will start working on this afternoon. I'm not assigning it, but I just know her. So we'll just start coordinating those efforts right now.
Thank you. I genuinely appreciate that. So May 10th is the ideal date, and May 17th would be the backup date for May. Very good. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate that. That takes us to the very last agenda item. Thank you, everyone, for being prepared and helping to facilitate this efficient meeting. I thought it was going to go a lot longer than this, but everyone's preparedness certainly made it go much more smoothly. Everybody safe travels and have a great weekend. The time is 11:29 and this meeting is adjourned.